The night David left was supposed to be uneventful, just another routine business trip that would leave me with the house to myself for a couple of days. Yet from the moment he closed the door behind him, the air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were aware of an impending revelation. Standing by the window, I watched the horizon transform into a cascade of fiery colors, the city humming with its usual life below. Normally, this view filled me with calm, but that night it felt different. The lights seemed sharper, almost watchful, like silent witnesses to a secret I wasn't yet privy to. David's departure was rushed but deliberate, each movement calculated. His usual affectionate goodbye kiss lingered just long enough to feel forced. "Make sure Ethan isn't bored tonight," he said casually, as if leaving me alone with his nephew was the most natural thing in the world. I nodded, dismissing the odd tone in his voice, though it echoed in my mind long after he left. Ethan was just a teenager, reserved but polite. We'd shared countless dinners and small talk, and yet, something about David's insistence on this arrangement made me uneasy. Ethan arrived shortly after David's departure, carrying a backpack that seemed too full for a simple overnight visit. "Thanks for letting me hang out here, Aunt Claire," he said, his voice low and his eyes avoiding mine. I shrugged it off, chalking up his awkwardness to teenage moodiness. Still, his demeanor added to the strange tension that had been building since David walked out the door. As the evening progressed, Ethan suggested playing a card game. It felt like an odd choice, but I agreed, hoping to fill the silence with something other than my swirling thoughts. We sat at the kitchen table, the shuffling of cards punctuating the quiet. At first, the game was lighthearted, filled with easy laughter and meaningless chatter. But soon, Ethan's behavior shifted. His hands trembled slightly as he dealt the cards, and he glanced at his phone more often than seemed normal. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice calm but probing. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the phone before meeting mine. "Yeah, fine," he mumbled, but the tension in his shoulders told a different story. The uneasy atmosphere thickened, and I found myself hyper-aware of every sound: the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of traffic, the soft click of the cards as they hit the table. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Halfway through the game, Ethan excused himself to take a phone call. He stepped into the hallway, his voice low and hurried. I strained to catch snippets of his conversation, but the words were muffled, incomprehensible. When he returned, his face was pale, and his hands fidgeted with the edge of his shirt. "You okay?" I asked again, this time with more urgency. He nodded, but his silence spoke volumes. As the game continued, my mind raced with possibilities. Why was Ethan acting so strange? And why had David insisted he stay here tonight, of all nights? The questions swirled in my head, each one more unsettling than the last. By the time I realized I had lost track of the game entirely, Ethan was staring at me, his expression unreadable. "Is something wrong, Aunt Claire?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying an undertone that made my skin prickle. The pieces were moving, but I had no idea what kind of game I was playing. The hours crawled by after that unsettling exchange, each moment weighed down by an oppressive silence that seemed to thrum with unspoken words. Ethan retreated to the living room after our game, leaving me to clean up the scattered cards and half-empty glasses of soda. My mind was a battlefield, torn between dismissing his odd behavior as teenage awkwardness and acknowledging the gnawing suspicion that something was deeply wrong. As I placed the last glass on the counter, a faint sound caught my attention, a floorboard creaking in the hallway. I froze, the sound reverberating in my chest like a drumbeat. "Ethan?" I called, my voice steady but laced with apprehension. There was no response. Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I stepped cautiously into the hallway, my bare feet silent against the cool wooden floor. The house felt eerily still. Every shadow stretched longer than it should have been, every corner darker than I remembered. As I reached the end of the hallway, I saw Ethan standing by the front door, his back to me. His posture was rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Ethan, what's going on?" I asked softly, my heart pounding against my ribs. He didn't turn around. Instead, he muttered something under his breath, too low for me to catch. "What did you say?" I pressed, taking a cautious step closer. He spun around suddenly, his face pale and his eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "He's watching us," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Uncle David, he's watching us right now." A chill ran down my spine, the weight of his words sinking in like a stone. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Ethan glanced toward the ceiling, his gaze darting nervously as if expecting to see David materialize out of thin air. "Ethan, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice cracking. "But he called me before he left. He told me to come here, to stay with you, and he said he'd be watching." His words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and foreboding. My mind raced, trying to piece together what he was saying. David's behavior earlier, Ethan's unease, the strange tension in the house. It all felt connected, but I couldn't see how. Before I could respond, a loud thud echoed from upstairs, making us both jump. Ethan's eyes widened, and he took a step back. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. He shook his head, his lips pressed tightly together. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I turned toward the staircase. "Stay here," I ordered, my voice firmer than I felt. Ethan grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't," he pleaded, his eyes filled with panic. "Please, don't go up there." The air at the base of the staircase was thick, almost suffocating. Ethan's grip on my arm tightened, his wide eyes pleading with a desperation that made my resolve waver. "Ethan," I said softly but firmly, "I have to see what it is." My words didn't calm him. Instead, they seemed to deepen the panic etched across his face. "Please, Aunt Claire," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You don't know what's up there." I tried to reassure him, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "It's probably nothing, just the house settling," I said, more to myself than to him. But as I stepped onto the first stair, the creak beneath my weight echoed ominously through the house, a sound that seemed to mock my attempt at logic. Ethan didn't follow. Instead, he hovered at the bottom of the stairs, his face pale and his fists clenched tightly at his sides. With each step upward, the silence grew heavier. The familiar creaks of the wooden stairs, which once seemed mundane, now sounded like warnings. The hallway at the top of the stairs stretched out in front of me, shrouded in shadows. The dim light from the street outside barely filtered through the curtains, casting faint, distorted shapes on the walls. My gaze landed on the first door to my left, the door to the guest room. The thud had come from this direction. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, each one more irrational than the last. What if someone was in there? What if David had left something behind, something I wasn't meant to find? Swallowing the lump in my throat, I turned the knob slowly, the metal cool and unforgiving against my palm. The door creaked open, revealing a room cloaked in stillness. Nothing appeared out of place: the neatly made bed, the closed closet doors, the small desk by the window. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning every corner for the source of the noise. Then I saw it, a picture frame lying face down on the floor. It had fallen from the wall above the desk, the glass cracked, but still intact. Relief flooded through me, though it did little to ease the lingering tension in my chest. As I bent down to pick it up, something caught my eye. Behind the frame, tucked partially under the desk, was an envelope. It was plain, unmarked, and sealed. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, the edges of the paper rough against my skin. A part of me hesitated, knowing that opening it might lead to something I couldn't undo. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, compelled me to slide my finger under the seal. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. As I unfolded it, my breath hitched. Written in David's unmistakable handwriting was a short message that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're not alone." I stared at the note, the words blurring as fear tightened its grip on me. What did he mean? Was it a warning? A threat? Behind me, the floorboards creaked, and I spun around, clutching the note tightly. Ethan stood in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I held up the note, my hand trembling. His eyes darted between the paper and me, his expression unreadable. "We need to leave," he said suddenly, his voice urgent. "Now." Before I could respond, another loud thud reverberated through the house, this time from the attic above us. My heart sank as I realized the night was far from over. The thud from above was sharper this time, echoing through the walls like a warning. My knees felt weak, but the urgency in Ethan's voice dragged me out of my daze. "We can't just leave," I said, gripping the note tightly. My words felt hollow against the weight of the unknown. What exactly were we running from? And why did this house suddenly feel like a trap? Ethan's fear was palpable, his breathing uneven. "Aunt Claire, please," he said, his tone bordering on desperation. "You don't understand. Uncle David, he..." He stopped himself, his words hanging in the air like a half-formed shadow. "He told me to stay with you, but he also said I couldn't tell you everything." I froze, staring at him. "What are you hiding?" My voice was sharper than I intended, the tension making me snap. "What did he tell you?" Ethan's face crumpled under the weight of whatever secret he was holding. "It's not safe," he muttered, his eyes darting toward the staircase. "None of this is safe." Another thud from the attic cut through the silence, louder and more deliberate this time. It was as if something, or someone, wanted to make its presence known. My instinct told me to flee, but my curiosity and growing anger held me in place. "Stay here," I ordered, my voice trembling. "I need to know what's up there." Ethan's grip tightened on my arm, his eyes wild with panic. "No, you don't," he cried, his voice breaking. "You don't want to know. Please, Aunt Claire. We have to go now." But his words only fueled my determination. Something was tearing at the fabric of my life, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I shook off his grip and made my way toward the staircase. Each step felt like a journey into the unknown, the weight of the note in my hand grounding me. The attic door loomed above, the faint outline of the pull string barely visible in the dim light. Ethan stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, his face pale and his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Reaching up, I grabbed the string and pulled. The ladder descended with a groan, the sound reverberating through the silent house. The attic above was pitch black, the faint scent of dust and something metallic wafting down. My heart pounded as I hesitated, one foot on the ladder. "If you won't come with me," I said, glancing back at Ethan, "then stay down here. But I need to know what's going on." Ethan didn't respond. He simply stared at me, his expression a mix of fear and something else, guilt. I climbed up, the wooden rungs creaking beneath my weight. As my head broke the plane of the attic floor, I froze. The darkness felt alive, pressing against me. And then I saw it. A faint, flickering light in the corner, casting long, jagged shadows against the walls. The flickering light in the attic corner cast an eerie glow, illuminating shapes I couldn't immediately recognize. My breath hitched as I strained my eyes to see through the shadows. The air was cold and heavy with the smell of old wood and dust. Each step I took made the floorboards groan, the sound echoing like a warning through the cramped space. As I moved closer to the light, the shapes began to take form. An old desk, cluttered with papers and objects, sat beneath the small attic window. The light came from an old battery-powered lantern resting on the desk. It swayed slightly, as though recently disturbed. My pulse quickened. Who had been here, and why? My gaze darted around the attic, searching for any sign of movement, but the silence was absolute. I reached the desk, my trembling fingers brushing against the cold metal lantern. Beside it was a notebook, its cover worn and edges frayed. Something about it felt familiar, as if it belonged to someone I knew. My chest tightened as I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable. David's. The sight of his neat, deliberate script sent a shiver through me. What was he doing keeping a notebook here, hidden in the attic? The first entry was dated 6 months ago, and as I read, the words chilled me to my core. She doesn't suspect anything yet, but the walls have ears and I need to be careful. Ethan is my only ally. I must ensure he follows my instructions. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. What didn't I suspect? What had David been hiding from me, and why was Ethan involved? The next few entries were cryptic, full of half-formed thoughts and references to the plan. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, each one revealing more unsettling fragments of a secret life my husband had been leading. The final entry stopped me cold. Tonight everything will come to light. She'll see the truth, whether she's ready or not. The lantern flickered again, the light threatening to plunge me into darkness. A faint creak behind me sent my heart racing, and I spun around. Ethan stood at the top of the ladder, his face pale as a ghost. "Aunt Claire," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You shouldn't be here." I held up the notebook, my hands shaking. "Ethan, what is this? What has David been planning?" My voice cracked under the weight of my fear and anger. Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting toward the desk. "He made me promise," he murmured. "I couldn't tell you. He said it was for your own good." "For my own good?" I snapped, the notebook falling from my hands. "What is going on, Ethan? Tell me now." Before he could answer, the attic filled with a loud, piercing sound, a metallic screech that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The lantern flickered violently, casting erratic shadows across the walls. Ethan's eyes widened in terror. "It's too late," he said, his voice barely audible. "He's here." Ethan's lips quivered as if the truth he withheld threatened to escape against his will. The attic felt colder now, the air tightening around us like a vice. He stepped closer, his movements hesitant, like a man standing on the edge of a crumbling cliff. "He told me it wasn't safe," Ethan finally murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "He said if you found out too soon, it could ruin everything." "Ruin what?" I demanded, the trembling in my hands turning into an uncontrollable shiver. "Ethan, I need you to stop hiding. Whatever David is planning, I deserve to know." Ethan looked away, his fists clenched. His shoulders rose and fell with uneven breaths, each one heavier than the last. He said you wouldn't believe me if I told you, that you'd think I was lying, or worse, that you'd think I was crazy." My patience snapped. "Ethan, enough." My voice echoed through the attic, and I hated how it cracked, betraying the fear coursing through me. "I just found a notebook filled with cryptic messages about plans, and a warning that I'm not alone in my own home. Do you think I can handle anything worse than this right now?" Ethan flinched, his gaze snapping back to mine. "He said someone's been watching you for months. Not him. Someone else." His words hung in the air like a noose tightening around my neck. "Uncle David knew it. That's why he made me promise to stay with you tonight. He thought they'd make a move if you were alone." The lantern flickered again, and for a moment, the shadows along the attic walls appeared to shift unnaturally. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Who's watching me?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Ethan's voice dropped, a tremor running through every syllable. "He called them the shadows. He said they've been following you for years, but only started getting closer recently. He didn't know why." My knees threatened to buckle as the pieces of David's cryptic notes began forming a dark and sinister puzzle. "This can't be real," I whispered, though the weight of Ethan's fear, and my own, said otherwise. The air shifted again, a subtle but unmistakable movement behind us. I turned sharply, my eyes scanning the attic. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "Ethan," I said quietly, "did David tell you what to do if they came?" His face paled further. "We weren't supposed to stay. He left instructions in case something happened, but I don't have them with me. They're back at his office." Before I could respond, a loud crash erupted from the floor below. The sound of shattering glass echoed up the attic stairs, and my body stiffened. Ethan darted toward the ladder. We need to leave, he shouted, his panic contagious. I hesitated for a split second, glancing back at the notebook still lying on the desk. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to grab it, but the chaos unfolding below made my feet move faster than my thoughts. Ethan had already descended halfway down the ladder when I started after him. As we reached the main floor, the destruction was clear. The living room window had been shattered, shards of glass scattered across the carpet. A cold wind rushed through the room, carrying with it an unnatural silence that made my skin crawl. My breath fogged in the chill, though the furnace had been running moments before. "Ethan," I whispered, gripping his arm. "Stay close." He nodded, his face pale as he scanned the room. Something moved in the shadows just beyond the broken window. It was subtle, barely a flicker, but enough to make me tighten my grip on Ethan. "What was that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he stepped in front of me, his posture rigid. "They're here," he said, his voice low and filled with dread. "Uncle David told me this might happen, but I didn't think it would be this soon." "Who's here?" I demanded, my fear quickly turning to frustration. "Ethan, I need to know." But before he could answer, the lights in the house flickered once, twice, and then went out entirely. Darkness enveloped us, and the only sound was the shallow rhythm of our breathing. My heart pounded against my rib cage as a single, chilling thought took hold. Whatever was watching us wasn't human. The oppressive darkness consumed the room, swallowing every outline and detail, until all that remained was the sound of our shallow breaths. My hand tightened on Ethan's arm, the cold sweat of fear coating my palm. "Stay close to me," I whispered, my voice trembling in the suffocating silence. The room felt alive, as if the shadows had shifted into unseen predators stalking their prey. "We can't stay here," Ethan murmured, his voice barely audible. "They know we're here." "Who?" I hissed, my frustration bubbling beneath the surface of my fear. "Who are they, Ethan?" "Stop dancing around the truth." Ethan's hesitation was maddening, but before he could respond, a sound pierced the quiet. A low, guttural scrape, like claws being dragged across the shattered glass in the living room. My blood ran cold as the noise reverberated through the house, each scrape deliberate, as if announcing its presence. "Run," Ethan said suddenly, his voice steady but urgent. He grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the kitchen. The floor creaked beneath our hurried footsteps, the sound feeling painfully loud in the overwhelming silence. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see something, anything emerging from the darkness, but the empty void behind us offered no comfort. The kitchen door loomed ahead, its glass panel reflecting the faintest glow from the streetlights outside. Freedom seemed so close, but the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on my chest. As Ethan fumbled with the lock, I turned my attention to the room behind us, my eyes scanning for movement. The scraping sound had stopped, replaced by a deafening stillness that was somehow worse. The door finally swung open, and a gust of frigid air rushed in, biting at my skin. Ethan pulled me outside, the crunch of gravel beneath our feet breaking the eerie quiet. "Where are we going?" I demanded, my voice rising in panic. "Uncle David's office," Ethan said, his grip on my wrist tightening. "He has everything we need there. We'll be safe." Safe. The word felt hollow, a feeble promise in the face of an unknown terror. But I had no better plan, and the fear in Ethan's eyes was enough to keep me moving. We darted across the yard, the darkened windows of neighboring houses offering no signs of life. The streets were empty, eerily quiet except for the sound of our hurried footsteps. Halfway down the block, I risked a glance over my shoulder. My stomach twisted. In the distance, near the shattered window of my house, a figure stood silhouetted against the faint glow of the streetlights. It was motionless, its shape distorted as if the shadows themselves had taken form. My breath caught in my throat as the figure tilted its head, as though watching us. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice breaking. He didn't turn around, his focus locked on the road ahead. "There's something behind us." "Don't look," he said firmly, his pace quickening. "That's what they want. Just keep moving." Against every instinct, I obeyed, forcing my gaze forward. My legs burned as we reached the edge of the neighborhood and turned onto the main road. The faint glow of a 24-hour gas station up ahead offered a flicker of hope. "We can stop there," I said, my voice laced with desperation. "Call for help." "No," Ethan snapped, shaking his head. "We can't stop. Uncle David said they can manipulate light, electronics. If we stop, they'll find us." My chest tightened as his words sunk in. This wasn't just fear, this was survival. Whatever they were unlike anything I could comprehend. And as we sprinted down the road, the feeling of being hunted pressed down on me, suffocating and relentless. In the distance, David's office building came into view, its darkened windows like empty eyes watching us approach. My legs felt like lead as we climbed the front steps, Ethan's hands shaking as he fumbled for the key. Behind us, the street stretched empty, yet the oppressive sense of being watched lingered, an invisible weight pressing against my back. The door clicked open, and we slipped inside, locking it behind us. The air inside was stale, carrying the faint scent of paper and old wood. Ethan immediately moved toward the back of the office, his movements quick and purposeful. "He kept it all in a safe," he explained, his voice tight. "If we can get it open, we'll have answers." I nodded, though my hands trembled as I reached for the light switch. "Don't," Ethan warned sharply, and I froze. "They can use the light," he added, his tone hushed. Instead, we navigated the darkness, the faint glow of a flashlight Ethan pulled from his bag guiding our way. As we reached the back room, the sound of glass shattering in the distance sent a chill through me. Ethan stopped, his breath hitching. "They're coming," he whispered. My heart pounded as we approached the safe, the sound of the tumblers clicking under Ethan's fingers, the only noise breaking the silence. Every second felt like an eternity, the weight of the unseen threat bearing down on us. And just as the safe door creaked open, a sound erupted from the front of the office, the unmistakable groan of the main door opening. The groan of the door sent a fresh wave of terror through me. My fingers dug into Ethan's arm as the sound reverberated through the office. "What do we do?" I whispered, the words barely escaping my trembling lips. The safe door was now ajar, but Ethan didn't reach inside. His eyes remained fixed on the entrance to the back room. "We stick to the plan," Ethan said, his voice steadier than I expected. He reached into the safe and pulled out a small stack of documents and a black notebook, slamming the safe shut with a metallic thud. "Come on," he urged, his voice low. "We have to keep moving." "But what's out there?" I asked, my gaze flickering between the shadows pooling at the edges of the room and the documents in Ethan's hand. My mind raced with questions, but the urgency in his tone left no room for hesitation. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward a back exit. The flashlight's weak beam barely illuminated the narrow hallway as we hurried through the labyrinth of the office. The silence felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Behind us, faint footsteps echoed in the distance. They weren't hurried, but deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, was following us knew we had nowhere to go. My chest tightened with every step, the oppressive sense of being hunted consuming me. As we reached the back door, Ethan fumbled with the lock, his hands trembling. "Hurry," I urged, glancing over my shoulder. The footsteps grew louder, closer. My heart raced as I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, a shifting shape that defied logic, its edges blurring and reforming as it advanced. The lock finally gave way, and we stumbled into the alley behind the office. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I barely registered it. Ethan pulled me forward, his grip firm as we sprinted toward the street. "We need to get to the car," he said, his voice tight with determination. "It's our only chance." I didn't ask where the car was or how he planned to outrun whatever was following us. I focused solely on keeping up, my legs burning as we dashed across the asphalt. Behind us, the shadows seemed to ripple, stretching unnaturally as they pursued us. My lungs burned with the effort, but fear propelled me forward. The car came into view, a black sedan parked under a flickering streetlight. Ethan yanked the door open and practically shoved me inside before scrambling into the driver's seat. His hands shook as he fumbled with the keys, the engine sputtering to life just as the shadows closed in around us. The tires screeched as Ethan slammed his foot on the accelerator, the car lurching forward. I twisted in my seat to look out the rear window, my breath hitching as I saw the shadows melt away into the darkness. For a moment, I thought we'd escaped. But then I saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the road, its form barely human. It didn't move, didn't chase us, but its presence was enough to send a chill down my spine. Its head tilted slightly, as if watching us leave, and though I couldn't see its face, I felt its gaze boring into me. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Ethan didn't answer. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "We need to get somewhere safe," he said finally, his voice hollow, "and then I'll explain everything." Safe. The word felt meaningless now. Whatever truth Ethan held, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. But as the car sped into the night, one thing was certain. The shadows weren't done with us yet. The car sped down the deserted road, the hum of the engine the only sound filling the tense silence between Ethan and me. My knuckles were white as I gripped the edge of my seat, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on me. The shadows were gone, but their presence lingered like a specter in the back of my mind. "You said you'd explain everything," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. "Start talking, Ethan. I need to know what's going on." Ethan hesitated, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Uncle David knew about the shadows for years," he said finally, his voice low. "He said they were drawn to you, like you were some kind of beacon. He tried to protect you without you knowing." I stared at him, my heart pounding. Why? Why would they be drawn to me? He swallowed hard, glancing at me briefly before looking back at the road. "There's something about you, Aunt Claire. Something they need. David thought it was your energy, your essence, something unique. He didn't fully understand it either, but he was sure of one thing. If they got too close, they could take everything from you." His words sent a chill through me, and my throat tightened. "And you knew this? All this time, you knew, and you didn't tell me?" "David made me promise," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "He said if you found out too soon, you'd panic, and that would make things worse. They feed on fear, Aunt Claire. It makes them stronger." I clenched my fists, anger and fear warring within me. So what was his plan? To keep me in the dark while they hunted me? "No," Ethan said quickly. "His plan was to stop them, to end it for good. That's why he left the notebook and the documents in his office. He thought he could find a way to sever their connection to you." Before I could respond, the car jerked to the side as Ethan swerved suddenly. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized why. A dark figure had appeared in the middle of the road, its form flickering like a distorted shadow. The tires screeched as Ethan regained control, speeding past the figure without slowing down. "They're getting closer," he muttered, his voice tight with fear. "We're running out of time." "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There's a place," Ethan said. "David called it a sanctuary. It's the only place they can't follow. He left instructions in the documents. I just need time to figure out how to get there." I looked at the stack of papers on the dashboard, the edges fluttering in the breeze from the cracked window. "Then start reading," I said. "I'll drive." Ethan hesitated, but the urgency in my voice seemed to spur him into action. He pulled the car over to the side of the road, and we quickly switched seats. As I took the wheel, Ethan opened the documents, his flashlight illuminating the pages in the darkness. "David was tracking them," Ethan said, his voice tinged with awe as he scanned the notes. "He mapped their movements, studied their patterns. He thought they were connected to something ancient, something older than we can imagine." I kept my eyes on the road, my grip on the steering wheel tightening with each word. "And this sanctuary, what is it?" "It's a place where their influence doesn't reach," Ethan explained. "David didn't write much about it, but he believed it was hidden, protected by something they can't penetrate." The idea of a safe haven was almost too much to hope for, but I clung to it like a lifeline. As the road stretched on before us, the oppressive sense of being followed grew stronger. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the shadows closing in. Instead, I saw headlights. "They're coming," I said, my voice shaking. "We have to move faster." Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he looked out the rear window. "That's not them," he said. "That's—" A sudden impact from behind cut him off, the car lurching forward as something slammed into the rear bumper. I gripped the wheel tightly, struggling to keep control as the vehicle swerved. "Who is it?" I demanded, my voice rising in panic. "I don't know," Ethan shouted, frantically flipping through the pages. "Just keep driving." The car tore down the road, the engine roaring as I pushed it to its limits. The headlights behind us grew brighter, closer, until they were blinding. Another impact sent a jolt through the car, and I gritted my teeth, fighting to stay on course. "Ethan, I need answers," I shouted over the noise. "Who is following us?" "I think it's them," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "Or someone working for them. David wrote about people, humans, who are under their control. He called them the Marked." The idea of human allies working for the shadows was almost too much to comprehend, but there was no time to dwell on it. The car behind us rammed into us again, and the tires skidded on the asphalt. My heart pounded as I struggled to keep us from spinning out. "There's a turn up ahead," Ethan shouted. "Take it. It leads to the sanctuary." I spotted the dirt road he was pointing to, barely visible in the darkness. Without hesitation, I jerked the wheel, the car veering off the main road and onto the narrow path. The headlights behind us disappeared as the other car overshot the turn, but I knew it wouldn't be long before they caught up. The dirt road twisted and turned through dense woods, the branches overhead forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The car jolted over uneven ground, and my hands ached from gripping the wheel so tightly. "Are we close?" I asked, my voice strained. Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the pages in his lap. "It should be just ahead," he said. "There's supposed to be a gate, a barrier they can't cross." The idea of a barrier felt like a faint glimmer of hope, but as the road stretched on, doubt began to creep in. What if David had been wrong? What if there was no sanctuary? Then I saw it. A tall, wrought iron gate loomed ahead, its intricate design glowing faintly in the darkness. The sight of it sent a wave of relief through me, but it was short-lived. The headlights reappeared behind us, cutting through the trees like a predator honing in on its prey. "Go!" Ethan shouted. "We have to get through the gate." I pressed the accelerator, the car hurtling toward the barrier. My heart raced as I prayed it would open, that it wasn't just a figment of David's desperate imagination. As we approached, the gate creaked and groaned, slowly swinging open on its own. The car sped through, and the gate slammed shut behind us with a force that shook the ground. The headlights stopped abruptly, the car behind us skidding to a halt just outside the barrier. I watched in stunned silence as the shadows seemed to writhe and recoil, unable to cross the threshold. "We made it," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're safe." But the relief was fleeting. As I turned to face him, my eyes fell on the documents in his lap. One page had a single haunting sentence scrawled across it in David's handwriting. "The sanctuary comes at a price."